Well, here we are after a wild ride. I debated long and hard on Saturday how to do this market update. And as I was doing my screens, I kept coming back to the futility of it. What does it even matter? Why not just ignore these screens and just go right into the one event and the only event that really matters? But we will spend some time on that. I don't know that it's really worth rehashing everything you've heard from everywhere else. We'll just point out some of the conclusions that other places have got to. I don't know that it's worth pointing out the stupidity of it all. It is stupid, but we have to sort of figure out, well, what is the point of it all? And even as I was going down that road, I thought, well, who cares what the point of it all is? It's what do we do now? What is the most likely outcome of this, and what the hell do we do? So I'll spend more time on that. But we do have to get through this because there are some important things to look at and some important things to be aware of. Let's have a look at our yield curve. And we have had a drop in yields across the curve. If we go from the 2 out to the 30, it's basically a full basis of, a full cut, almost 25 basis points across the whole curve. Even the 1 year is coming out 18 basis points lower. So if we look at this is the beginning of the year, the top line, this is the change since the beginning of the year. Since January 1st, all rates and yields are lower. 30 basis points down on the 1 year from the beginning of the year, 18 out on the 1 year, 21 out on the 2 year. These are big moves. Big enough that it is reinverting the curve. You now have a 3-month to 10-year that is deeply, I shouldn't say deeply, but much deeper inverted for the year. I think that is the deepest for the year, negative 27 basis points. It is not just flirting around the zero line, but it is inverted. My bet is it would continue to invert. Even the 2 to the 10 is beginning to invert. We have an FOMC meeting that is 31 days away, and Powell on Friday did not seem to be in any kind of emergency frame of mind, which caused the market to take another leg down because what we would have liked to have seen from Powell is a sense of urgency about the situation, saying this needs to be fixed, this needs to be repaired, but it was nope, not going to say anything. I wonder if it was symbolic that his speech was 3 feet from the exit. I saw that right away. I thought, wow, that's where I would want to be, 3 feet from the exit. 1 basis point cut at the next meeting went from 18% to 30%. And we get the minutes from the last meeting in 3 days. With the radical change we've had over the last week, that's a history lesson. I don't even know that this is important anymore. I'm going to read it just to see where they are on the balance sheet and what the discussion of that was. But beyond that, I don't think that anything said in that meeting even applies anymore. U.S. CPI in 4 days, PPI in 5 days. With the anticipation of tariffs, I don't know that anybody took the opportunity to lower prices. I think that companies and businesses probably took the opportunity to raise prices in anticipation of any increase. So I don't expect good news out of CPI or PPI. Certainly not good news that would give the Fed permission. I don't think we're going to find permission for the Fed from prices. We're going to find it from full employment. That is where the Fed is going to move. If the economy falls apart, I don't know that you're going to get much progress now on any of the price indexes, because you do have tariffs that have taken effect as of 12:01 a.m. Saturday morning in the U.S., with a small caveat. It is 10% on all goods coming into the country on ships that have not left a port yet. So let's say there was a ship that left China at 11:59 p.m. on Friday night, but it has left port and it has goods on it heading towards a San Francisco port or an LA port. Because it has already left the port of source, it would be exempt when it landed. But only if the ship had left before 12:01 a.m. Anything in transit right now, that's fine. Bring that all in. That's good. But anything new showing up at a land border, at any border, any good showing up, 10% across the board, with more expected to happen on April 9th. The ridiculous tariff numbers that were trotted out by the White House, with a lot of conversation about how stupid they are and where they came from. It was figured out, and the conclusion is, how can they be this stupid? That's the point. That was the point of it, and I'll explain why when we get there. You do have some Fed speak this week, and I think it probably takes on more importance because this will be the question on everything, right? Monday, Kugler; Tuesday, Daly; Wednesday, Barkin; Thursday, Goolsby and Logan; Friday, Williams and Muslim. I think the interesting ones, Barkin, Goolsby, Williams, I think will be the interesting ones. Reverse repo, negative 184 billion. Reserves still sitting at 3.4 trillion. The runoff is so slow, it's not even worth counting the months anymore. Look at the disparity in performance for the week. Hopefully you had a long position in duration. It's the only thing that really saved you. Up 3%. Should have been up more. I was watching the action on Friday and it just refused to break 94 and floated back down to 93 on TLT, and I got a just a sinking feeling on that, thinking, if this is the moment to perform, what's going on? I'm not going to give it that much longer before I decide that I want to sell calls aggressively on it and maybe exit. This was bad. That is 1 week, 9%. All of that coming in 48 hours from King Trump's announcement. I'm going to use the adjective king to describe Trump at this point because there is very little daylight between the definitions and actions of a king versus the current president. Unilateral decisions made by one man, the belief in the infallibility of the leader ordained by God, right? This is now where Trump is at the level of a king that can make decisions for everyone based on his own belief, God's voice to his ear. Let's look at the Fed funds futures. Pricing in quite a bit now. We're at 4.33 on the effective funds rate. 103 basis points in just 3 meetings. That is 4 cuts in 6 meetings. I think you're going to 8 to 10. If, big word, right? If the administration stays, well, administration, there is no administration. If the king stays on this current path and will not be swayed, then yes, look out below. This will get far worse. We'll look back on 508 on SPY and think, oh, what a great selling opportunity that would have been when we're sitting at 2,400. If the path does not change, and quickly, if those new tariffs go into effect on Wednesday, all bets are off on where the bottom is. I don't know where the bottom is at that point, and I don't think 4 cuts in 6 are going to help. I think you're going to get big, rapid cuts because this will be a global phenomena, not just an American phenomena, but a global phenomena. The best course is that the 10% stay in place. I don't think those are going anywhere. But if those fantasy counter tariffs, reciprocal tariffs that are just pure fantasy, by the way, if they go into effect, it's over. And I don't know that that even 8 to 10 would even matter. What do you have in here? 4.33. That is 17 cuts to get to zero. 17 to get to zero. And the longer these stay in place, the more likely zero is going to be where you need to be. Interest expense as a percentage of government spending, and I mean government spending with the deficit where it is 13%. 13%. If you tried to balance the budget, just off the top here, if I do a little bit of calculation, if you tried to balance the budget, the interest payments would move to about 17.5% of federal expenditure. So you got to get it down anyway. So one benefit of completely crashing the economy and the global system is you would finally get your interest rates, the interest rate on new debt coming out, very, very low. Let's not talk about the fact that probably nobody would want to buy it, but still you would have very low interest expense. Right now, ZQ is what I would watch for where the market happens to be in its assessment of where the rate cuts are. And I think ZQ is going to respond more to full employment. I don't even think it's going to be phased by CPI or PPI, regardless of what the number is. Let's have a look at real rates. All of them are down. 5-year real rate 1.38. And again, if we continue on this path, I would look for real rates all the way out to the 10-year to turn negative. Look at what is going on with break-even rates. This is not pricing in a relaxation of inflation. This is not pricing in disinflation or even deflation. This is pricing in recession. That explains the move on this, down 24 basis points. And if you continue on this path and you do head towards recession and that yield curve comes down, if the tariffs remain in place, that is not going to help price stability. Prices will remain high and elevated while the economy drops. You will get real rates below zero. How's that for an investment? Hey, why don't you buy my 10-year bond and we'll return less purchasing power to you over time. You'll get a negative real rate. Look at corporate spreads. It's over. I want to say nothing to see here. There is something to see here now. This is as of Thursday night because this is all OTC. You don't actually get all the settlement for one more day, so we're not going to know till Monday how Friday settled out. But look at these moves. High yield index spreads widened 22%. On double B, the highest of high yield, widened by 27%. Triple C widened by 18%, 158 basis points. Now over 10%, 10.18. The highest. This was the October lows, this is September 29th, sorry, 12.89, and this was of 2023. I should note that, not 2024, 2023. This could blow these out over time. If we stay on this path, I would look for especially high yield to take out these highs. But that again, as of Thursday, we had another blood red day on Friday. I'm sure spreads widened on Friday as well. But the 30-year not doing anything, 6.64, not helping out at all, down only 1 basis point. Again, this is as of Thursday, April the 3rd. And we look at GDP now, still running negative 2.8, removing gold because that's an import. That would make the X minus M component of GDP really negative. Take it out, negative 0.8. Negative 0.8. And here are analysts. The range, this is the blue chip consensus, and this is the 90th percentile range. Even at the 10th percentile, they're not forecasting something below zero. We get this number April 30th at the end of the month. You don't get it till the end of the month, so we've got some time before we get that. We will get, I think, one job report. We will get the GDP, a PCE, and a CPI before the next Fed meeting. I don't think that's going to be as important as initial claims. Stellantis has idled the Windsor plant for 2 weeks. That's a layoff. When you idle the plant, that's a layoff. Has idled 5 Detroit plants and idled a Mexican plant for 2 weeks. Land Rover announced that it will not sell its vehicle into the U.S. anymore because of the tariffs. This is just the beginning. You've had, if you scroll through Twitter feeds looking for things like layoffs, tariffs, just streams of announcements. Our company laid off 200. I got laid off today. We're looking at more layoffs if this happens. Bloomberg trotted out a whole bunch of businesses on Friday talking about how this would devastate them. When you have a system that is globally integrated and you have one country where for years it was efficient to globally integrate, to rip it out in one night, you're going to destroy a lot. The question that I guess just remains in the end is, what type of destruction is this? Is this the destruction that is the end of the empire? Or is it destruction in a Schumpeterian sense of creative destruction? I know that doesn't fit his definition of creative destruction, but are you destroying things to build it up bigger? That's the belief coming out of the King's Court. We'll dive into that and see if any of that could actually happen, if any of that makes sense. One thing I found curious, here's your 30-year mortgage. It's not really budging, but housing stocks on Friday, they were up. I find that just a little bit curious because that is the most discretionary of discretionary spending. And there's no extra help from rates here. Labor is a bit of a problem, I think, because you've shut down all immigrants coming in legally or illegally from the southern border, which was a big source of construction labor. And if we are facing higher tariffs and really damaging tariffs, with all the banks raising their recession forecast, many lowering their target on the S&P, why would housing have a good day? I'm not questioning it in the sense of, I do have some exposure to it. I'm just, got a question mark there saying, that's curious. Well, this is ugly. Here we are, 504.89. I think it was 5. This is after hours. I think the official closing is 505.24. All-time high just on February 19th, 6/12/30, down 17.5%. 17.5% from the start of the year. U.S. equity, just U.S. equity markets are down $12.6 trillion from the start of the year under King Donald's reign. In just this week alone, $6.6 trillion. King Donald has declared it so. forward 4-quarter operating earnings, because we've now shifted forward 1 quarter. We have Q2 to Q1 2026, 278.96, because earnings are always forecasted like this. So when this one falls off, the fourth one comes in. So it's the delta between that gets added. This is going to have to come down. There's no two ways about that. That is going to have to come down. Closing SPX 5074. That gives you an 18.1 times forward multiple versus 20.76. You would say, aha, that looks good. 18 times, is that a buying opportunity? Only if you believe that this number will hold. In a recession, it will not. In what we're going to face if these tariffs come in place is a slowdown. At least those earnings will not. I think at a very minimum, you'd put them to 260. At a very minimum, in a recessionary environment, you can get them down to 200. You get them down to 200, you're probably going to be at 14 times on the index itself. You're 2,800. Even if you get it down to 260 on earnings and you say, well, 18 might be a good multiple if we get it down to 260, right? You're certainly not going to have multiple expansion with earnings coming down. If you do that, you get to about 46 to 4,700. You still got another roughly 5% down, maybe as much as another 40% down, depending if there's a recession. And if the narrative that is starting to brew starts to gain more traction, that America is becoming an uninvestable country, I don't even think I would stop at 2,800. Look at implied volatility, never been higher. There's money to be made in volatility, 100 percentile. Right out to the 52 weeks. Basically, implied volatility is at a record over the last year. Here it is right here. You can't see it, but I'm just going to draw the line, how it comes right off the end of the chart all the way to here. And over the last year, the highest peak was over here. Last reading, 36.4%, up from 18.6, doubled. And that's basically in 2 days. On TLT, 17.3 up from 13.6. You're at 100% on the 13th week percentile. If you're going to sell calls on TLT, that's the time to do it. It's now 92, 92nd percentile based on 52 weeks, up from 40. We have volatility. IWM down 25%. That is a bear market, clearly. IJR down 25%. That is a bear market. Triple Q's down 21.5% on the closing. That is a official bear market. We're just waiting for this guy. Where's the bear market level? 489.84. Heck, you could open up there tonight on Globex. Futures could open up blood red. I've seen no headlines this weekend that suggest that they'll open green. And thinking it through for the weekend, because on Friday I was buying certain things, thinking that, wow, this is really overdone. It's not really going to be that bad. It's probably going to be the 10%. There are a bunch of carve-outs. Of the $4 trillion that comes in, some $700 billion is carved out. And if you just stick at 10%, well, instead of paying $45 for a t-shirt as an American, you're going to pay $49.50 and say, that's not so bad. I think so. I think you can sneak the 10% buy, and there'll be carve-outs for certain things. That some level of rationality will prevail. I don't put more than a 50% probability on that. But in thinking about it over the weekend, I lowered that probability that a certain type of rationality will prevail, and that will be the rationality that the king is operating under, which is general stupidity, but in his mind, it's a rational path. We'll look at that, and we'll look at, is there a way out? Can this actually work? Is there some way that you can pull a rabbit out of the hat on this one? Is he really a genius, and there is this pathway that is going to be absolutely magnificent. We'll look at that. I think you know my answer to that, but we'll give it a fair shake. We have 10 companies reporting this week. This is going to be super important. Earnings are going to be a killer. Not because of what they say happened, but the guidance that they're going to give. By the way, they both have 10. I gotta say what Trump says all the time. No one's ever seen anything like this. However, when I went to look at the companies reporting, they disagree on who's reporting. But at least they both got 10. I mean, that's something, right? I'm telling you right now, they're ripping us off. They're taking our jobs. They're ripping us off. We'll look at what companies are reporting. Friday being the big day. The banks' guidance will be everything. I'm going to listen to every conference call I can squeeze in. I'm going to listen to them all. As many as I possibly can, 6, 7, 8 hours a day if I have to. The guidance. I'm going to make a prediction that in this quarter for reporting, we're going to have a record number of companies suspending their guidance. Because how can you guide? How can you possibly guide into a world like this? If you get to Friday, if those tariffs are implemented on Wednesday, and you get to Friday and you're offering guidance, what can you possibly say other than, look, we don't know? I would suspect that you'll have a record number of companies that will suspend their guidance, and that is never good. I wouldn't look for earnings to save the day here. I think the guidance will either be suspended or be dismal, but one thing is for sure, the word tariff will be spoken by everybody on every call, not just the S&P 500, but all the, I think, what do we have? Some 5,400 publicly traded stocks in the US. Not that I would listen to all of those, but it will be the most mentioned word. Uncertainty will probably be the second most mentioned word. And again, a record for the suspension of guidance. Let's look at the companies that are reporting, and then let's get into it. All right, Wednesday, we have Constellation Brands. That will be interesting. A lot of American alcohol. I think all the American alcohol is off the shelves in liquor stores, I think pretty much across Canada. Big signs, just empty shelves with a big sign that says, buy Canadian instead. So that'll be interesting. Delta Airlines, well, travel to the US, at least from Canada, is way down. Like, I think even worse than Great Recession, down, way down. And we're not even in a recession. This is just the consumer backlash against the U.S. belligerents. I shouldn't even say the U.S. belligerents, the belligerents of the king, in the way that this policy is being conducted in the most undiplomatic way. They're ripping us off, making us sound like we're the ones that are doing something wrong. If a company willingly enters into a transaction and says, hey, can we get some of that potash you have? Sure, here you go. This is the price that we would sell it to anyone for. You can have it. We're not. That's not a Canadian firm ripping off an American firm, right? But that doesn't sell. It doesn't have to be true. It just has to support your position. Delta Airlines will be interesting. The guidance on that is going to be entertaining. So if you want to engage in this game, I would definitely be listening to the conference call for Delta and for Constellation Brands. Those two. What do we got on Thursday? Progressive. I think that'll be insulated a lot. It's the insurance companies really are very domestic. They should be immune from the effect of the tariffs, although I would look for premiums or maybe guidance on premiums for auto insurance to go higher. Because with a 25% tariff on autos coming into the country, that'll raise the replacement cost of the vehicle. But all the domestic vehicles, the producers aren't just going to sit back and say, well, let's just keep selling them at the same price. They'll keep the same delta. So if a vehicle were priced $10,000 lower than an imported Mercedes, and the imported Mercedes goes up by $15,000, the domestic one will go up by $15,000 as well. They'll keep the same delta. And insurance rates, especially policies that have replacement, will also go up as well. Look for Progressive there. CarMax. CarMax will be really interesting because this will definitely boost the used car prices. So all of their inventory overnight just got a negative impairment. Not impairment on the way down, but on the way up. So their guidance will be interesting to listen to. And then the big show, the banks. Look at that. JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, Morgan Stanley, BlackRock, Bank of New York. If you had to pick one, which one would it be? Definitely JP Morgan. The biggest, baddest bank on the planet. Biggest, well, I shouldn't say on the planet, but at least in the US, JP Morgan. I'm going to be listening to that one. And that's earnings for the week. So we've got the business leaders showing up and saying what they think and giving guidance. And I don't know that guidance is going to be good at all. I think that guidance across the board is going to be, this is bad, this is negative, we don't know. Also, listen for layoffs, of how many people would be laid off, because companies that are facing a drop in revenues don't just sit there and say, oh, well, we got a drop in revenues. If it's something that they can't fix on their own, if it's part of the environment, they fix it on their income statement by lowering their costs. That usually means layoffs. Okay, let's start at the very beginning. Let's start at the White House. I think there's a spelling mistake here. King is not spelt with a P-R-E-S. I think that needs to be changed. This is a wrong statement right off the top. Regulating imports with a reciprocal tariff to rectify trade practices that contribute to large and persistent annual United States goods trades deficit. The trade deficit is a symptom of a problem. It is not the problem. What you have is a uninformed individual who believes that the symptom is the problem and is going to treat the symptom and not the problem, thereby making the problem persist. This will not fix the trade deficit. My forecast right here, right now, is that the trade deficit will actually get worse under this policy, not better, which will make the king angry. Let's see what we have. We have a whole bunch of language here. This is not important to read. This is just, grievance after grievance after grievance. I'm surprised in here that he didn't mention how the election was stolen from him and that the Ukraine war never would have happened if he were president, because every other grievance is in there, but you can read it. Using national emergency. As president, my highest duty is ensuring the national and economic security of the country and its citizens. He's using IEPA, emergency economic powers. And if you read it, it refers to an unusual trade deficit. Unusual. Well, there's nothing unusual about this. So it is a very long stretch to use this. To say that this is presidential overreach is an understatement, but no real pushback. The Senate tried, but the House, there's no backbones there. There's no backbones because Well, there are tariffs on backbones now, and most Congress people don't make enough money to afford a backbone after the tariff. The European Union and Canada have both agreed to import into the U.S. or export into the U.S. backbones, but Trump put a tariff on backbones, so there is nothing there. But it is a stretch. I'm surprised the Supreme Court, that something hasn't been brought to the Supreme Court to say, look, this can't be done. But nothing. Maybe that's still a possibility. Here's the reciprocal tariff policy. We don't have to really read that. Implementation. Except as otherwise provided, all articles imported into the customs territory of the United States shall be consistent with law, subject to an additional ad valorem rate of duty of 10%. Such rates of duty shall apply with respect to goods entered for consumption or withdrawn from warehouses for consumption on or after 12:01 Eastern Daylight Time, April 5th. Except that goods loaded onto a vessel at the port of loading and in transit on the final mode of transit before 12:01 a.m. So we see that as long as they're loaded on a boat and have left port by that time, they're good. We don't have to read Annex 1. Annex 2, carve-outs. The following goods, as set forth in Annex 2, consistent with law, shall not be subject to rates of duty under this order. This is the weakness. This is where other countries can look at what the U.S. wants to carve out and say, fine, let's restrict those materials to the U.S. or let's put an export duty on that because they're telling us, hey, these are things we really need. Showing your hand here. All articles that are encompassed by 50 U.S.C. 17OB. I didn't look into that. All articles and derivatives of steel and aluminum subject to the duties imposed pursuant to Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act. In other words, don't put another 10% on steel and aluminum. We've already hit steel and aluminum. They're exempt from this extra 10% duty. Number 3, automobiles and automobile parts, subject to the additional duties imposed pursuant to Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act. So don't hit that either because, we've got 25% on that. So don't hit that either. Other products enumerated in Annex 2 to this order, including copper, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, lumber articles, certain critical minerals, and energy products. Because he's still debating what the tariff on that will be, but somebody tapped him on the shoulder and said, not like copper, pharmaceutical, that's going to really give us a hard time. A really hard time. So they got an exemption for a period of time, he says, because of course you always have to keep that sword over your opponent's head. Or said in a more modern time, you always have to keep the gun pointed at their head. Even when they agree, you never remove the gun. You never, ever remove the gun from their head. Always hold that gun there. Copper really took a dump into the end of the week. It was sitting at 520 at the beginning of the week, end of the week below 450. I would be interested in copper in the low $4. So hopefully the king continues to wave his sword in the air and threaten people. All articles from a trading partner subject to the rates set forth in column 2 of the harmonized tariff schedule of the United States. So the carve-out comes to about $650 billion worth of product. With respect to articles from Canada, I have imposed additional duties on certain goods to address a national emergency resulting from the flow of illicit drugs across our northern border. Let's not mention more cocaine flows into Canada from the U.S. by far than fentanyl flows into the U.S. from Canada. That Canadians have a bigger claim to a national emergency because of drugs crossing the border, but it doesn't matter. That's not the purpose of this. The purpose of this is to declare a national emergency, is to use the emergency power. So you just make something up. It doesn't have to be true. It just has to be repeated enough times and believable by at least some people. And all you need is even a shred of evidence to say, for example, look at this, the John Oliver tactic, where you take an extreme example and you hold it up as an example of the mainstream, right? John Oliver from HBO, he does that a lot. So this stays in effect, along with Mexico as well. Let's look down here on some of the other sections. Modification authority. Look what he says in here. The Secretary of Commerce and the United States Trade Representative, in consultation with the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Treasury, the Secretary of Homeland, in other words, all the people I own, all the people I own agree to B, should any trading partner retaliate against the United States in response to this action through import duties on U.S. exports or other measures, I may further modify the HTSUS, which is this act, to increase or expand in scope the duties imposed under this order to ensure the efficacy of this action. If you protect yourself one bit and don't let me win, I'm going to hit you even harder. You let me win and you'll be okay. In other words, just lose. Just lose now and it'll all be over. This is what Article B says. Some countries will. Smaller countries will. Larger countries with kings like China will not, because he cannot look weak in front of his own people. He cannot look weak. You have the European Union and Canada, which are contemplating retaliation as well. They haven't really done anything yet, but saying, look, we will, but they haven't really done anything yet. C, should any trading partner take significant steps to remedy non-reciprocal trade arrangements? Now, what are those? They're anything you want them to be. They're anything that causes you to still be losing. In other words, if you say, fine, we're going to get rid of all tariffs, here you go, and you still have a trade surplus with the country, you'll still accuse them of something, right? You'll still accuse them of something. That's what this allows you to do. Take significant steps to remedy non-reciprocal trade arrangements and align sufficiently with the United States on economic and national security matters. In other words, let us win. If you don't let us win, we're going to say that you still have significant non-reciprocal tariffs in place or non-reciprocal trade impediments in place. D, talk about a threat. Should U.S. manufacturing capacity and output continue to worsen, I may further modify to increase duties under this order. So what's that is saying is, even if all of this doesn't work for me, I'm still going to punish you even more. Now, here's the thing. It's not going to work, because the king is operating under a faulty belief. The king is operating under the belief that U.S. manufacturing jobs, high-paying jobs, were lost to countries with low-cost labor. That this is a result of high-cost labor being substituted with low-cost labor. That is not true. Up until the time that China was allowed into the World Trade Organization, the number of hours it took to produce a vehicle in the United States in 1980, 40 hours on average of labor hours to produce one vehicle, had fallen to below 30 hours before China was entered in, and had fallen to 20 hours by 2007. And this is just in the US alone. That means from the time that China entered WTO in 1999 to 2007, over those 8 years, you went from just a little under 30 hours to 20 hours. The choice with American manufacturing was not between, do I use high cost labor or do I use low cost labor? The choice was, do I use automation or do I use low cost labor? If low cost labor is off the table, automation is back on the table, not jobs. Automation is back on the table. Now, D is not saying should manufacturing jobs, it's saying should manufacturing capacity and output continue to worsen. If you go into a recession, it will continue to worsen, which will make the king angry. And then the rest, you have implementation, reporting, general provisions. It's a long, the first part is long and wordy with a bunch of grievances if you want to read that. Okay, I'm sure you've seen these charts everywhere and the numbers on these charts, and where did they get the numbers on these charts? Because when you look at what the current amount in place is, a lot of it, you look at, you go, this doesn't make any sense at all. And I'm sure you've seen the meme floating around of the island of penguins, that they have reciprocal tariffs on this island that has 0 inhabitants on it, only penguins. So you know this is not a serious output. And how they define this column is they say tariffs charged to the U.S., including currency manipulations and trade barriers. Anybody who's done any economic research, any PhD candidate and PhD holder out there knows, just if you're just going to say, well, how do we measure currency manipulation? That is a dissertation on its own. How do you measure other trade barriers to come up with a tariff equivalent is a dissertation on its own. You're talking about a research project that spans multiple authors and decades. And they got this done somehow with a bunch of yahoos, bimbos and mimbos in a couple of weeks? No. So we know it's bullshit. The argument that is being made is very simple. If we have a trade deficit with a country, we're America. How can we be losing? And they see a trade deficit as losing. How can we be losing? The only way we can lose is if the system is rigged. The only way I can lose an election is if the election is rigged. The only way we lose is if the system is rigged. So that's all we need to know. If there's a trade deficit, it must be everything in it. It must be cheating to some degree. So we start there. Because how can we possibly be losing? We're the USA. So this is massive misrepresentation. It doesn't matter though. It doesn't matter. They make the assumption in here that comparative advantage is 0. Why does the island with the penguins, why is it listed on this list? There is actually a trade deficit with that island. Believe it or not, there is a trade deficit with that island. What the hell could they possibly be exporting? This island of penguins, what could they be exporting? It's very simple. If you have an American that takes a vacation in Europe, that is for this citizen over here, they are importing their vacation. They are importing it. Even though they're traveling to Europe, it is counted as an import. So if you have scientists that go down to this island over here and investigate things, all the cost of this is seen as an import. That's how stupid it is. It's like somebody couldn't stop and say, oh, wow, it's not really an export from that island, but it is counted as an import because money is being spent outside of the country, so something must be imported. It's an accounting result. So yes, that island is exporting scientific research, a location to conduct scientific research. Because any American scientist who travels to that island to investigate something or research something is actually importing vacation services. So yes, in a rough sense, that island of penguins does have a trade deficit with the U.S. But that you couldn't step aside and point it out? Does that speak to the stupidness of this group of people? Or would you say, no, that's not what they're doing? This is the formula they give, x minus n over, this looks like some real Peter Navarro stuff. Just a whole bunch of something to say nothing. So how did you get this? It comes down to the trade surplus over imports. Why? Because E equals 4. And the other, I don't know my Greek very well, the other symbol is 1 over 4. So 4 times 1 over 4. 4 times 1 over 4. That crosses out to 1. It's exports minus imports over imports. So it's the trade surplus with whatever country against the U.S. over imports from whatever country. This just comes to the conclusion that all trade deficits are the U.S. being ripped off. Well, if this is not serious, it's not even meant to be serious. I'm sure they're laughing at the penguin thing going, that's pretty funny. And none of them are embarrassed because that wasn't the motivation of writing this at all. This is not serious information. This is propaganda. And that's all it was meant to be, was propaganda. I will read you the definition of propaganda and you tell me if this fits. I'll read you 2 definitions. The dictionary, Oxford Dictionary definition of propaganda: information, especially of a biased or misleading nature, used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. Does this support reciprocal tariffs? Yeah, that's all that it had to do. It doesn't have to be true. It's all that it had to do. The king wanted tariffs, believes that tariffs are the solution to whatever problem the U.S. has. It's a revenue generator. It'll get rid of the trade deficit. It'll bring jobs back to America. It'll make America great again. Did I say it was a revenue generator so we can continue with the tax cuts? I think I said that, right? So give me some information that absolutely supports that point of view, including a trade deficit with an island inhabited entirely by penguins. Here's another definition of propaganda. Propaganda is the dissemination of information, facts, arguments. This is defining what information is here. Facts, arguments, rumors, half-truths, or lies to influence public opinion. You can call this, you can, and I've seen, this being talked about on podcast after podcast, on news report after news report about how stupid it is, how stupid must these people be. These are the people that are running the government, how dumb they are. You can't even see this. This was created by ChatGPT. No, you're missing the point. This was never intended to be serious. This is propaganda. This is just propaganda. Again, the first definition: biased or misleading nature used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. As propaganda, this is an A+, right? As data, this is an F. If this were a university paper, if this were a PhD dissertation, this data, done, that's an F. You're out of here. See you later. As far as propaganda, that's an A+. Okay, let's look at where we are as of Friday close. Once we get an assessment of where we happen to be, we'll start thinking about, is there a way out? And what is the most likely course of action going to be, considering both economics and psychology? Because you cannot devise an option or an alternative or a scenario without considering the psychology of the king. And then before we even do that, we'll first of all define the problem, exactly what the problem is, so that we will see that all the ways out that we have do not address the problem. The problem will not go away, which will make the king mad. In 2 days, U.S. equity sell-off. Just in 2 days, $6.6 trillion wiped off U.S. equity markets. in 2 days, in 48 hours. This is data from the Wall Street Journal. Mag 7 lost 1.6 trillion. So ex Mag 7, $5 trillion. Besant said this is not a MAGA problem, this sell-off. It is a Mag 7 problem. Mag 7 was only 1.6 trillion. That means the rest must be a MAGA problem. So MAGA is responsible for $5 trillion rout. From the beginning of the year, January 1st, this is before inauguration date, $12.6 trillion have been wiped off the U.S. equity markets. And the high on the market from the beginning of the year, you went all the way up to February 19th before you hit the high of the market and then straight down. So in the last 7 weeks, it is more like $16 trillion if you consider the high of the market, $16 trillion under King Trump's reign. Now, January 21st, I believe, was the inauguration. He hasn't had his coronation yet, so maybe I should say the king in waiting, because I'm sure a bill will pass in Congress soon by some Republicans suggesting that that the president should be installed as king and have a coronation. Maybe king is the wrong word. Maybe emperor. I wonder if there's anything on Polymarket for when Trump will be installed as king. I wonder if there's anything there. 10% tariffs start at 12:01 a.m. Saturday. They are now in effect again for anything that is being loaded as of 12:01. If anything has left port or left a warehouse, a bonded warehouse, it's not going to be tariffed. More to come April 9th. That's all the crazy stuff you saw, all the propaganda you saw of what reciprocal tariffs are. Nothing more than, we have a trade deficit with you, you must be cheating. You must be cheating. How can I lose this game? I'm me. You must be cheating. China is not going to back down. 34% on U.S. imports. This starts Monday, plus 9, I believe there were 9 rare earth minerals that are restricted from export to the U.S. Can't have them. And 16 U.S. companies on a ban list that Chinese companies cannot do business with these 16 tech companies. I read the list, never heard of them. I don't know, maybe they are important in some degree somewhere, but I read the list and I thought, I never heard of these companies at all. I didn't bother looking them up. I never heard of them. Maybe it's symbolic. The EU and Canada are also talking about retaliation. It would be, I think, politically unacceptable for Carney not to retaliate, not to reciprocate, I should say. It would be politically unacceptable, and he's facing an election coming up. He's going to have to. The European Union, they're pretty much going to have to as well. Current exemptions exist, 644 billion, 185 for Canada and Mexico, but again, they still have the fentanyl tariffs in place, and there is 459 billion on the rest of the world coming. Remember, we saw this in the carve out, the exemptions, but he says coming on the pharmaceutical sector, on lumber, on copper, on semiconductors, on critical minerals. I don't know how you're going to get that done. Semiconductors, critical minerals, copper, pharmaceutical sector. I don't know how you're going to get that done, but okay, there you go. If all of these tariffs come to pass, April 9th comes and all those tariffs come into place, you're going to an average tariff rate of 22%, a little more than 22%. That's pre-World War II level. I don't know how far back, but I know it's pre-World War II level. This is the Magnificent Seven companies' revenue from abroad. They're most exposed because they have brand names. However, they're also very difficult to avoid, except for Tesla. I think Tesla is going to be facing a very long, painful slide downwards. That brand is tarnished at this point, based on what has happened so far and the role that he played. And now with these tariffs, I don't know if the consumer, the global consumer, is going to separate Elon Musk from Donald Trump when it comes to these tariffs. So I don't hold out a lot of hope on Tesla pulling this one out. Nvidia, I don't know that you can avoid them. Microsoft, I don't even know if you can avoid them. Even if you wanted to boycott, how are you going to get that done? You're going to stop using Microsoft products. Unfortunately, if you're using it, you're using it. There's very little you can do. Meta, I don't think it's going to affect them at all. Maybe their advertising revenue. You know, maybe there's something there, but overall, I don't know. Apple. If you're an Apple user, you're an Apple user. You know, if an American has to pay $2,300 for an iPhone, so be it. They'll pay $2,300 for an iPhone. What Apple can do is make a light version for the US that has fewer features, maybe an older screen, a less vibrant screen, maybe a smaller battery or a less battery life to try to keep the price down in the US. Maybe they introduce a light model. The rest of the world gets the good iPhone and Americans get the light iPhone, maybe. Amazon, well, it's a lot of third-party sellers on Amazon, a little over 30% of their revenue. But, you know, if you account for all the third-party sellers, I don't think Amazon really is affected to that extent. Alphabet, these are big numbers, but I don't know that there is much boycotting you can do of these other than the consumer discretionary one, the big consumer discretionary, which is Tesla. You either have one or you don't. With Apple, if you're already in the ecosystem and you need to replace something, it's difficult to pull yourself away from that. So I don't know that I would look for too much damage here, but the guidance on these will be interesting. This is in, I think, 3 weeks. I think some of these happen in 2 weeks. Actually, no, I think they're all 3 weeks to 4 weeks away on this one here, with Nvidia being the longest. It'll be near the end of May. Another curious thing, Besson, I got a prediction on this one. I don't think he's on board. I think he's doing what I think he's doing his job, but I think in his heart, I don't think he's on board with this. My prediction is that he's going to leave before the end of his term. He'll either be fired by Trump, or he'll walk away saying, I can't be associated with this any longer. I think he's having second thoughts. I don't think he's on board. Let me lay out my argument for you here. In the Bloomberg interview on Friday, or on Wednesday night, this caught my attention right away. Canada and Mexico are not on that list. Why is that? And he says, I didn't even know that. And I that caught my attention. I said, what? What do you mean you didn't even know that? How do you not know that? He didn't even know it. He's not even in the room. He's not part of that inner circle. And again, my suspicion goes back to, I think Trump is short the market. I think Lutnick is short the market, because where you see Trump, if you look right behind him, there's Lutnick, right behind him. I think I wouldn't put it past them. But Besson, I don't know that his character would do that. I don't know that he would participate in that. And maybe that's why he's kept on the outside. Maybe that's why he wasn't in the room. Maybe that's why he doesn't have this information. Maybe that's why the reporter had to tell him. That the reporter saw the signs, saw that Canada and Mexico wasn't there, but Besson, that was still just news to him. This doesn't sound like somebody who's invested in this. This sounds like somebody who is slowly starting to distance themselves. And it's his don't retaliate part. Look, we have a ceiling here. Don't retaliate. That didn't sound like a threat. Trump, when he says it, it's a threat. Lutnick, when he says it, repeats a threat. But this didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like just some friendly advice. Look, guys, let's just look. We got a ceiling here. You know, let's cool it down. Trying to contain what I think he knows is going to be a really big, ugly fallout if it goes further. I think he might be the one force in there that's trying to hold this thing together and make it not that bad. I don't know that he's going to win on this one because I don't think he's on the inside. But I get a feeling that he is going to leave before the end of his term. Either he'll just walk away saying, this is not worth my character, I'm out. This is wrong, and I'm not going down with the ship, or he will be fired. I wonder if that's on Polymarket. I bet on Besant. Anyways, let's look at the real problem here, and it's so simple to find. It's just so simple to find, and then we'll look at ways out, and we'll see that the ways out don't actually solve the problem, which means there probably is no way out. Okay, let's first define the real problem. Before we come up with how do we get out of this, we'll look at ways of how we get out of the king's madness, but we first must understand the nature of the problem. Then we're in a position to determine if any of the ways out will actually solve the problem. There is an identity in economics, GDP equals GDI. We'll start there. There are two ways to measure GDP, aggregate output or the aggregate expenditure approach. And we know that that equals aggregate income. We can measure GDP by the output approach, by the expenditure approach, which is pretty much what we do with the expenditure approach, C plus I plus G plus X minus M. We're going to deal with all of these parts in a second, and we know that that equals aggregate income. What we're saying here is if you make something and you sell it for $1,000, GDP will go up by $1,000 because that is domestically produced for final consumption. It goes up by $1,000. Well, you sold it for $1,000, so your income goes up by $1,000. That's the identity. Anything that adds to GDP adds to income in equal proportion. Well, I want you to think through that for a minute. If your income equals your output, what happens if you want to spend as a country in aggregate more than you make? Where's it going to come from? If income equals production and you want to spend more than what you produce, where's it going to come from? It's got to come from imports. It's got to come from another country that produces more than what it consumes. It simply has to. So let's take this part of GDP, put it over here, X minus M. And if we are spending more than we make, we have a trade deficit for 2024. It was negative 1.2 trillion. Okay. So far, that matches the data that we have. Now let's deal with the incomes. Well, you don't get to keep your income, right? You get what's called disposable income, which equals your income minus your taxes. The government gets your taxes. There is government over here, right? The government collects taxes, but then spends money. T minus G. That's what it does. What does a consumer do? Out of its disposable income, it can consume or it can save. When it saves, it can make investments. Investments aren't counted in GDP, so we usually take S minus I off. And there's our identity. Our trade balance, because if just to back up a little bit, if we spent what we made, this would be zero. If we spent what we made, this would be zero. That doesn't mean there are no exports or imports. It means the exports and the imports would be balanced because we're spending exactly what we make. But if we're spending more than what we make, then there must be something going on over here. Our identity is very simple. Our identity is X minus M must equal whatever we save minus whatever we invest, plus the government, the taxes it generates, minus what it spends. Simple as that. That is a pretty solid identity in macroeconomics. Well, we have negative 1.2 trillion for 2024. We don't know what this is, but we do know what the fiscal deficit is. It was negative 1.83 trillion. So negative 1.2 trillion must equal X plus negative 1.83 trillion. It's easy to see X must be 603 billion. There you go. The fiscal deficit creates a trade deficit because you're putting more money in the system than what you're producing. It has to buy something. When it goes to buy something, there's not enough domestic production. It has to import. The tax revenue for the U.S. was $4.92 trillion. Government expenditure decided to spend $6.75 trillion. That's where you get the negative 1.83 happening in here. Of the 6.5, GDP data shows that it spent 1.5 trillion towards the final goods and services. 1.5 trillion. Social Security was 24% of the 6.75. That is a transfer payment to households. Interest on the debt was 13% of the 6.75 trillion. That is another transfer to households. Health insurance. Spending on health insurance amounted to 24%. Sorry, this was 21%. This was 24%. Benefits to veterans and federal employees, 8%. So you can see that a lot of this isn't for final goods and services. It's actually a transfer to the household sector. So this might be, let's say, negative 1 trillion, which would make this negative 200 billion. No matter how you look at it, the problem is very simple. America, as a country, wants to spend more than it makes. You're going to have a trade deficit. The problem is not that countries are ripping off the U.S. or taking their jobs. They're taking their jobs. See if anyone can get that reference. They're taking their jobs. That's not the problem. The problem is, as a country, America wants to spend more than it makes. You're going to have to import. A big culprit is the government. So what can it do? Raise taxes. Do you think that's going to happen? Do you think it's going to raise taxes? Not really. But you could say, well, what about the tariffs? The tariffs are actually going to bring in revenue. Well, we're going to look at that. Because that could be one way to balance the trade deficit, is to say, well, if we get revenues up and we get this 1.83 trillion to move up to negative 603 billion, if this is positive 603 billion, we'd have no trade deficit. Because we wouldn't be pumping all that money into the system. We would be extracting money out of the consumer so they don't spend it. And then we would be able to balance the fiscal budget. And as long as the consumer balances their budget, we would have no trade deficit. That's it's doubtful that you're going to raise $1.83 trillion in tariffs. You have $4 trillion in imports. You've already carved out roughly about $650 billion. So you got $3.35 trillion. Even at 10%, that's only $335 billion, assuming that imports don't budge one bit. That everyone keeps buying what they're buying and paying the higher prices, that imports don't budge one bit. You'd raise $335 billion, not $1.83 billion. You still got to come up with $1.5 billion somewhere, $1.5 trillion somewhere. You're not going to get much out of the government spending on final goods and services. You're going to have to hit entitlements, which Trump said we're not touching. Not only that, this $4.92 trillion, no tax on tips, that's going to be lower. No tax on overtime, that's going to be lower. No tax on Social Security. Well, Social Security is 21% of the $6.75 trillion. No tax on Social Security, that's going to be lower. Stock market is not going to deliver gains this year, so capital gains tax is going to be lower. So there is no way, unless you actually raise tax rates, unless you actually raise taxes, there is no way to get rid of that trade deficit from the government side. The only thing you can do is cut entitlements, which they say they're not going to do. What about over here? What about the consumer? If you count most of this negative 1.83 trillion as transfer payments over here, let's say that it all ends up over here, then the household is negative 1.2 trillion. There is a very, very easy way to fix the trade deficit. Is you pass an executive order ordering all the credit card companies to immediately lower all the credit all the credit amounts to $2,000 or lower if it's already lower. Everyone gets $2,000. That's it. No more $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 credit cards, all the way down to $2,000. So if you owe 10, well, then you're out of business. You got to pay back the 10 before you can spend again. You have to stop the consumer from spending their money that they get. That would be a forced savings rate. You will fix the budget deficit at that point. You will fix the trade deficit at that point. Those are your two ways. Either the government balances its budget, and if they balance their budget and the household balances their budget, you will have no trade deficit. No trade surplus, but no trade deficit. If the government runs a surplus and the households run a surplus, you can then start having a trade surplus because you will make more in your country than you can absorb. You would have to export it. There, now you can begin to understand other countries that export. If they're exporting, it must mean because they have a very high savings rate or the government is running a budget surplus. Well, there's China. There are a lot of European countries as well where the consumption level is much lower. There is no country with a greater ability and willingness to spend household income than the United States. The U.S. consumer and the U.S. government are the cause of their own trade deficit. Okay, let's look at some possible ways out of this. Number one, the US dollar could increase by 10%, is that you could have a concerted effort around the world of central banks to say, hey, wait a minute, we can fix this. Let's buy US treasuries. Let's push up the value of the US dollar. Let's devalue our own currency by 10%, and there we go. The price of imports would drop by 10%. Add the 10% tariff, you'd basically get no effect. $4 trillion of imports. If the price drops 10% in US dollar terms, the US dollar value of that would now be 3.6. Add your 10% on, 360 billion, 3.96 trillion. There's your 4 trillion. No real effect. Americans would pay the $360 billion in tax. However, the value of their currency could have got them something at 3.6 billion, but they'll still pay 4 trillion. Sorry, 3.6 trillion, but they'll still pay 4 trillion for it. You have a trade deficit of 1.2 trillion, 360 billion off of that. You now have a trade deficit of 840 billion that you'd still have to deal with. It still wouldn't close the trade deficit. That would make the king angry, and he would raise tariffs even more. You'd have to continue on with this until you wipe that out. Here's a problem though. Export prices would also rise 10% because another country's currency is dropped in value. That made the U.S. export that much more expensive. They would switch to other products or even domestic consumption. Exports would drop, thereby reversing this in the trade deficit would go back up to, I don't know, let's say $1 trillion, let's say 1.1 trillion. Maybe it's offset dollar for dollar. Maybe it goes back to 1.2. So that's not an effective solution. So I don't know if, even if a group of central bankers got together and said, well, we can get this done, somebody else would point out, but hang on a second, this would happen. That's not going to solve America's problem of balancing its trade. And it won't stop until it balances its trade because it sees its trade deficit as being ripped off by the rest of the world. It sees its trade deficit as subsidies to the rest of the world as opposed to they're just spending more than they make. You got to get them to that conclusion or you got to fix it for them. This is not going to happen. I don't see this, but currency changes could get it done. A better solution here is simply a weaker U.S. dollar. Because with a weaker U.S. dollar, then it reverses. The value of their exports increases and the cost of imports increases as well. I shouldn't say the value. The cost of their exports decreases. The cost of imports increase. Currencies can do a lot. Devalue the U.S. dollar. You can do a lot. However, would that still change the equation within the economy that Americans want to spend more than they make? Not really. It wouldn't change anything. They would just buy other countries' imports. They would just switch to other things or continue to buy the more expensive stuff, because if you're going to spend more than you make, you have no choice but to import. Doesn't solve the problem. This would not solve the problem. What about countries just give in? They say, okay, we'll reduce our tariffs to zero. We'll fix this currency manipulation for whatever that is. I don't know. You tell me what you think we're doing, and we'll try to change it, because we have no idea. We'll get rid of the non-trade barriers for whatever that is. And the combination of this will be whatever results in a trade deficit. Unless we have balanced trade with you, then this is still going on. You need to do something. You need to do something. You need to continually devalue your currency till it hits zero, or you have to do something with your non-trade barrier. In other words, let us win and we'll be okay. That's simply not going to happen. Now, some countries will give in, others won't, so I don't think that's a way out. Some will give in, but that's not going to solve the trade deficit. It will continue to persist. What about manufacturing moving to the U.S.? That has been the big one, right? And we're going to bring jobs back to the U.S. Manufacturing, if it's made here, there's no tariffs. If it's made here, we don't have to import it. If it's made here, it's GDP. If it's GDP, then it's GNI. And if you're going to still spend more than you make, you're still going to have a trade deficit. You see that? It doesn't solve the problem. If you're going to give Americans more money, and Americans have a habit of spending more than they make, it's not going to solve the problem. You'll make more, but they'll still want to spend more than they make. You're still going to import. If you move manufacturing to the U.S., it does not change this identity. GDP still equals GDI, which means that'll boost GDP because you're making more domestically, but that'll also boost incomes. And if you still want to spend more than you make, too bad. It's not going to fix anything. Not only that, you're not bringing jobs back to the U.S. Again, we think that it was U.S. jobs versus foreign jobs that was the equation over the last 20 years. It wasn't. It was automation versus foreign jobs. Jobs were already being lost to automation long before China entered the World Trade Organization, 1980. I've said this before, to 2007. 40 hours for GM to make a car, 20 hours by 2007. By the time China entered WTO, it was about 28, 29 hours. It already was going on. It was already going on. If you bring manufacturing back to the U.S., you bring automation back to the U.S., which is a lot of productivity, which means you're going to make a lot of stuff, which means you're going to have to export a lot of stuff to countries that probably don't want to take your stuff anymore because of the way you did things. I don't see that being a solution. Not only that, this takes years to get done. In the mining sector, it takes years to build out a mine, a productive mine. Even to build an automotive plant, you're talking 1.5 to 2 years to get done. And if a foreign company comes to the U.S. and sets up an assembly plant, they're going to use the latest in automation. This factory will be way more productive than the domestic factories, and they will have a cost advantage over domestic producers. Foreign producers will sell more than domestic producers, and you'll have another cry of, they're ripping us off, they're ripping us off, they're taking our job. They're not even hiring people anymore, and look what they're doing. You take a look at what they're doing over there. No one's ever seen anything like it, right? This is the problem over here. You still have to fix this problem. You hire more Americans, you bring back manufacturing, more people in the mall, spending more than they make. You still have the trade deficit, because where are you going to get all the stuff that they want to buy? You still haven't fixed the problem. In fact, this could make the problem even worse by giving more people more money to spend. What about nothing? What about nothing? What if American consumers just say, okay, we'll pay more. We'll just keep paying more. That would be the easiest way out of all of this, because the American consumer really is the engine of global consumption, or a big part of the engine of global consumption. No other country No other advanced Western country spends as much per household than the US. Now, you have some poor countries that spend a lot more per household than the US, only because they make so very little. They make so very little, and it costs a certain minimum to be alive that they pretty much spend it all and even more. But as far as a Western country, capitalist democratic country goes, the US is number one by far in its spending. By far. It's also got one of the highest incomes per household. The highest incomes per household, but also the willingness to spend, and the US government. It is no wonder that if you look back through the economic history and you look at the trade deficit, you'll see that there's a fiscal deficit every single year. So we've had a fiscal deficit for 45 years. You've had a trade deficit for 45 years, even longer. The cause is a sickness within the body itself. As the movie says, the call is coming from inside the house. Run. And doing nothing is one option, where other countries say, well, we're not going to retaliate because we're not going to make our consumers pay more. But there's nothing to fix. There's nothing to fix. We're not manipulating our currency, and we're just not going to do anything. That nobody does anything. And consumers, U.S. consumers, simply just pay more. Now, businesses are strategic. They can still find a way to deliver to the consumer. You can take a car coming from Mexico into the U.S. and you could say, well, instead of having a 5-year powertrain warranty, let's make it a 2-year, because that will lower the warranty reserves, which is a charge against income that the auto company has to take. Let's take the tires. Let's say we're giving 4 tires plus the spare. Let's change the full size to a donut. And let's lower these from 80,000 or 100,000 kilometer tires to 60,000 kilometer tires, and we'll put a 60,000 kilometer warranty on that. Maybe there is no touch screen, and we'll just use digital or manual controls on the dashboard. You can get that down. You can also do layoffs. You can find a way to increase productivity with capital and lay off some people. You can get the cost down. Companies are strategic. They're not just going to sit there and take it in some linear fashion, right? They're going to change their behavior. They're going to change what they do. Either they'll redirect trade somewhere else, they'll trade with other trading partners, or they will shrinkflate their product, right? Inflation comes in 2 flavors. Number 1, you have the same product, X, except you'll pay more for it. Number 2 is you'll pay the same amount, but the product you get is somewhat smaller, somewhat cheaper, somewhat lesser quality. But you'll pay the same price, thereby thinking that you're getting the same thing, but you're getting something less. Both of those are forms of inflation. One is just called shrinkflation. Businesses are strategic. They will do that. They will manage their income statement. If they see that revenues are going to take a hit, they'll find a way to manage their price. They'll manage their price with cost. And they'll manage the rest of it on the income statement, which means layoffs, right? So is that going to do anything to change this dynamic? Spending more than you make. Is it going to do anything to do that? Probably not. Number 5, Trump reverses. I don't see that happening. I don't see that happening. So let's just put this in perspective. The U.S. dollar appreciating, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I don't know, but it's not going to fix the problem because it's only going to hurt the exports. Countries giving in, some will, the big ones won't. The number 2 economy in the world, China, is not going to give in. Canada, doubtful. I think we're number 7 or number 8. The European Union collectively as a whole probably won't. Maybe little bits here, little bits there, but they'll hit back with some tariffs. If you do hit Mexico, Mexico will more than likely hit back with something. So countries giving in, I don't see that happening as well. Manufacturing moving to the U.S., that's not going to solve the problem. And manufacturing moving back to the U.S. will favor capital over labor. Automation will win. Uh, Doing nothing, consumers paying more, I see that as more likely. So Visa, MasterCard, to me, no matter which scenario we go through, seems like the clear winner here because you're not doing anything to fix the problem of spending more than you make. All you'll do is either continue that problem or make it worse, which means you'll never solve the problem, which means if you're looking for something insulated from tariffs, Visa and MasterCard, they don't care if you're buying an import or a domestic product. They just care that you're buying. That's all they care about. Trump reverses, I don't see that happening. So what do I see happening? I see more downside. I see more blood in this market. I see more red. Let me have a look at where Bitcoin is. It's been negative all weekend. There has been nothing out so far this weekend that anything has gotten any better. I've gotten no news, no headlines. Now I've been doing this for 2 hours here, so maybe in the last 2 hours world peace has broken out everywhere and Trump has gotten religion, economic religion, said, you know what our problem is our spending. I don't see any headline like that. And Bitcoin, if we look at it from the Friday close, is red. It's big time red. So I don't anticipate this market will open up green. It could open up 150 points down and confirm a bear market on SPY. If we continue on this path, if on Wednesday those higher tariffs come in place, you will remember 500 on SPY as the good old days when everyone had money, because we will head straight down. I hope you have duration to balance that out. My plan is to short the US market on any rally with impunity. I'm not going to hold back because there is no cure, because no one is talking about the problem. And they're only going to make the problem worse. All these tax cuts coming in is only going to make the problem worse. The US brand has been so tarnished in the last 7 weeks. You have consumers going out of their way to avoid American products wherever they can, to avoid American travel wherever they can. Canada issued travel advisories, and we usually get travel advisories like don't go to Yemen, don't go to Palestine. The one we got, don't go to the US. Watch yourself at the US. Giving a list of all the ways we should behave when we enter the US and what we should do, and reminding us that we have no right to be there and all the rules we need to follow, and maybe we'll be okay. But a lot of people have decided to avoid the US altogether. The damage has been done. I don't see this coming back for quite some time, and I don't see the king changing. I don't see him changing at all, and I don't see a government. I don't see that happening at all. I don't see a Supreme Court. I don't see a Congress. I don't see anything. So it is the will of one man. Whatever he wants, whatever he decides tonight is what we must all agree to, whether we want to or not. We must live with the infallibility of the king. In Trump, we must trust. This will only end badly if, again now, hear me when I say this, hear me clearly when I say this, if he stays on this path, then yes, it is more blood, a lot more blood. But if he changes, if something turns around, if all of those extra tariffs disappear by Wednesday, saying, okay, we're not going to do that, but the 10% stays there, I think you get a rally. I think you get a relief rally, of which I will short, because in the end, it is still King Trump, and it'll be some other grievance that he has with the world. He is hell-bent on destroying everything that doesn't have his name on it. The United Nations, that's a disaster. It's a disaster. It has to go. They're ripping us off. I don't know. Is he saying anything about the United Nations ripping us off yet? That's coming. Everything is a disaster. That's not going to change. That's not going to change, which is why I don't see this turning around. U.S. Even if everything reverses, I think you're going to have a conclusion among world leaders that the U.S. is way too volatile and unreliable to make any kind of a deal with. And I think most companies, when they work out the logic of point number 3, moving back to the U.S., well, I can set up a plant in the U.S. Let's take Nike. Let's just take Nike, for example, making their shoes in the U.S. Well, we can make them in the U.S. Right now, they make them in countries where their labor rates are about 50 cents an hour to $1. Even if they can get away with minimum wage in the U.S., that's $7.50 an hour. You're talking about a 700 to 1,500% increase. Let's take an average 75 cents. It's a 1,000% increase in labor costs. Okay, well, let's see what we can do. Well, you got to get the material and the rubber. There's no rubber in the U.S., so we got to import the rubber. Well, there's 10% import tax on the raw material. We got to import the material that we need. There's 10% import tax on that. That by the time they import the raw materials, pay the 1,000% increase in wage labor, it would be cheaper just to make the shoe where it is and say, well, Americans will just pay 10% more. Instead of $100 for a pair of shoes, just pay $110. You're not going to notice it. Use your credit card. Just pay $110. We're not asking for a lot more. Just pay it. That is more likely going to be the calculation that most companies make, that by the time they set up in the US, by the time they have that lead time, by the time they figure that, well, we still have all the import duties and all the raw materials we need, you know what, let's just make it here because, you know what, regimes come and go. This one will go, and we'll quietly fund the Democratic candidate for Congress in 2 years. And at least we'll slow them down there. And then we'll quietly fund the Democratic candidate in 4 years and get rid of this government. We can wait the 4 years. That is more likely going to be the calculation. So if you have a long investing horizon, 20 years, 30 years, my advice would be just don't look at the market because it's going to get uglier before it gets better. Just don't look at it. Just don't look at it. And use the money as an opportunity to buy at a lower price and vote with your I guess with I was going to say vote with your money, but vote in the next election in your own self-interest. Vote for what is going to help you, not help one man, right? If you need the money in the next 6 months to a year, I don't know. Unless you see some of these things coming to pass, the US dollar strengthening, some countries giving in, enough manufacturing moving to the US, consumers willing to pay a little bit more, Trump giving up a lot on Wednesday saying, okay, only the 10% will stay in place, and you see all that working out and all the anti-US sentiment kind of going away and people forgetting all about it. If you see that, then maybe hang on. I don't see it. I do not see it, and I'm thankful I have US duration because I think that'll perform well, because this is a path to the destruction of the economy. The central bank will have no choice but to bring those rates right down to zero, all the way down to zero. But equity markets could easily fall another 40%, another 50% from where they are now in a recession scenario, and especially in a global recession scenario. I do not feel good about this market. But you got to do what's right for you. That is my analysis. You're free to disagree with that, saying, oh, no, everything's going to work out fine. Well, then maybe it will. That's the bet you're making. Just know that I'd be betting against you, which may mean nothing or may mean something. Anyways, that's it right here. You could talk about this for hours and hours, but it really doesn't matter. In the end, it comes down to what the king is going to do, and that's all that matters, is what's the king going to do. All of America's future is tied to the decision of one guy on his golf course right now who will decide later on what he wants to do as he feels he wants to do it. Period. Without an understanding of what the real problem is. America as a country, on whole, in aggregate, wants to spend more than they make. You have no choice but to run a trade deficit when you do that. End of story, period. First year textbook. I will be doing a live at 6 p.m. when Globex opens. We'll see what it looks like at that point. If it's green, if it's big and green, I am shorting that thing with impunity. I am not holding back. I'll see you at 6 p.m. I'll only be on for an hour, 6 to 7, because at 7 I switch over to a live feed on Discord for people on Discord. So you got me for 1 hour at 6. Ciao.